the 60th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day in Ottawa. My son Daniel and I are out with thousands of others to cheer on the vets, the World War II generation to which my father was so strongly linked. Many still remember Matthew Halton, the most recognizable voice of Canada at war. What do you remember? Do you remember those broadcasts?
I remember that they kept us going. You know what I mean? Because he described everything so nicely and easy for people to understand. And he was a wonderful man, your dad.
I recognize some people. Well, how are you doing, sir? Not too bad.
I mean, you sound very much like your father, as you well know.
Well, no, I didn't know that, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. And, you know, sort of, they were measured. And I think they had a calming effect on everybody. And it wasn't a BBC voice, and it was a Canadian voice.
At Ottawa's new War Museum, there's an exhibit honoring Canada's war correspondents. One of my father's original broadcasts from the front is played and played and played again.
The Germans were demons. The Canadians were possessed by demons. The more murderous a battle, the harder both sides fought. If it wasn't hell, it was the courtyard of hell. It was a maelstrom of noise and hot, splitting steel. The more murderous a battle, the harder both sides fought. From window to window, from door to door, in a carnival of fury.
After the war, we lived in London for a while when my father became the CBC's chief European correspondent. For my sister and I, good times with Dad were sometimes a bit too rare. I guess that's a perennial problem for the families of roving foreign correspondents. It's one of my great regrets that I was too young when he died to have talked with him about the epic stories he covered. Hitler's rise to power in Berlin, the Spanish Civil War, and oh, so much more.
A voice that has been familiar for many years on overseas broadcasts to Canada will be heard no more. Matthew Halton, the CBC's senior European correspondent, died today in a London hospital at the age of 52.
I suspect that it's been a bit of a heavy burden in a way, that his father was so well known. I also suspect that this is part of the challenge for him, not to be overshadowed by his dad, because his dad certainly was one of the first of the CBC correspondents.
I hadn't been a foreign correspondent for long before I was covering my first war. It was the Six-Day War in 1967. With Paul and Jean, my Paris camera team, we were the first TV crew to get to the Allenby Bridge on the Jordan border, an incredible sight just after it was bombed by the Israelis.
These are the remains of the Allenby Bridge over the Jordan River, the eastern extremity of the Israeli advance into the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
And significantly, 4 days after the invasion, Israeli heavy artillery here has still failed to silence PLO positions.
Some of these villages hoist the South Vietnamese government flag during the day, only to become VC enclaves at night.
It was often impossible sometimes to even know which side was right or wrong, or separate the various issues. Often it was a clash of two rights, much more complex. The certainties were gone. You knew the world was in turmoil, and you didn't know where it was heading. And often you really had to struggle to tell the story without that confidence that his father would have had in the righteousness of a cause and the willingness of an audience to hear of that righteousness.
It's a region where the paramilitaries and the guerrillas are locked in almost constant conflict, and where the civilian population is paying a terrifying price. Haiti's military regime, a demonstration that U.S. officials fear could easily turn into more chaos and violence.
A lot of things are complex, And that's the test of a good correspondent, not just doing the bang-bang, but explaining what the bang-bang is all about, what caused it, and where it will end.
In the late 70s, I took a long break from wars and upheavals abroad to plunge back into domestic politics, moving to Ottawa as the CBC's chief political correspondent. I must say, I couldn't have hoped for more intriguing leaders to cover than Pierre Trudeau, René Lévesque, Brian Mulroney, or for more compelling stories than those that happened to unfold on my beat.
A triumph for the no side. David, why did it happen?
Knowlton, the no side obviously won in my mind for three fundamental reasons. Most Quebecers...
Welcome to the 1980s.
The last colonial link, and here I really am being drowned out by those jets above me. Brian Mulroney becomes the first conservative leader from Quebec.
It's not so much the gentlemanliness as the fairness and the evenness and balance. David's always had a pretty clear view of where the journalist fits in society. They weren't actors, and they weren't activists. And I think he, in the latter stages of his career, I think he was uncomfortable with some of the younger generations of journalists who believed that their role was to supplant the opposition, to carry opposition messages to government or to institutions. And I don't think David believed that.
The question goes to Mr. Halton. Do I have it?
Gentlemen, I'd like to ask whether...
He still remained through the stresses of the 60s, 70s, 80s, very much a kind of ideal of how you can do journalism and rough-edge journalism and tough journalism without losing that sense of gentleness, humility, and civility, quite frankly, without losing it altogether in the craft. And that was a good lesson to a lot of us.
Prime Minister, you say you don't want to comment on your disagreements with the Ryan report. Could I ask you, does the Conservative Party favor introducing proportional representation at some later stage?
As you will know, David, from
even on Parliament Hill, it's a pretty rough and tumble affair, you know, screaming and scrums and things like that. And David was a bit above that. He sort of floated somewhere in the background. And, you know, the Prime Minister would say, David, I'll take a question from you now.
I'll be happy to try and answer your questions. Mr. Halton?
Premier Wells told us this morning that he's prepared to make some compromises on the...
And then David would have his question, but he wasn't like the rest of us.
Washington was the longest assignment I had. Here I am checking out a Senate hearing on the controversial appointment of John Bolton as U.S. ambassador to the UN. Hardly a big story, you say, and you're right. But in this superpower capital, events and decisions you might ignore elsewhere become important. Their ripple effect felt right across the world. Seeing and reporting on events in the U.S. through a Canadian perspective is valuable. After all, we do see quite a lot of things differently. Solemnity and a sense of history weighed heavily on the Senate chamber as the impeachment trial began.
There be an aura.
Peter, this country woke up this morning to a truly astonishing situation. Not one, but two presidents in waiting. Their hopes of winning the White House depending now on a tiny slice of votes in Florida. One of the very worst parts of the healing process for her was coming here to ground zero.
In a sense, as David retires, I wonder if we're not seeing the passing of an era when correspondents had not just a confidence, but a humility and modesty about them. And I worry that the modesty is not there as much as it once was and probably should be.
Claim that Cuba was using its science centers to develop a biological weapons program.
But it was always the story that counted and not David Halton. He was always shoving the story to the fore, not himself. I worry that we're passing from that era when the correspondent was very much secondary to the story and the telling of the story, and is becoming more and more the celebrity individual, the personality, in quotes.
To reinforce George